The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are among the most famous of the ancient world's seven wonders. They symbolize human ambition, the desire to transform arid landscapes into luxuriant irrigated paradises, to produce an artificial Eden that defies local climate, and to project royal power through landscape design. Yet, unlike the pyramids or the Parthenon, there is no archaeological monument securely identified as the Hanging Gardens. This document traces the stories, the scholarship, the competing theories, and the probable engineering behind the gardens. It separates ancient testimony from later redwellings and offers a balanced view of the real story. Most accounts of the Hanging Gardens come from Greek and Roman writers who wrote centuries after the gardens were said to have existed. Key ancient sources include Berassus, a Babylonian priest writing in Greek 3rd century BCE, now lost. Survives in later summaries. Berassus purportedly described a garden built by Nebuchadnezzar II for his Median wife Amytis. Herodotus, 5th century BCE, mentions Babylon's walls and palaces, but does not describe the gardens in detail. His silence is notable. Diodorus Siculus, 1st century BCE, offers a description of lofty terraces planted with trees and irrigated by an engineered device. Strabo, 1st century BCE, provides a second-hand description, citing earlier authorities. Philo of Byzantium and Philo of Alexandria, Hellenistic writers, provide technical remarks about devices that could have lifted water. Quintus Curtius, Rufus Josephus, and later Roman Greek encyclopedists also add to the narrative, sometimes mixing facts and romance. Crucially, no contemporary cuneiform Babylonian inscription explicitly names or describes the Hanging Gardens. Number Babylonian plan or list of building projects has been found that is unequivocally about them. This absence frames the central mystery. Geography and political history. Babylon was located on the Euphrates River in southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. As a major urban and ceremonial center, it flourished in multiple phases. The first millennium BCE witnessed Assyrian dominance, followed by a Neo-Babylonian renaissance in the late 7th and 6th centuries BCE, under kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II reigned k.e. 605–562 BCE. It is during Nebuchadnezzar's reign that many monumental building projects, city walls, palaces, and temples are historically attested. Nebuchadnezzar II and the Neo-Babylonian revival. Nebuchadnezzar II is the historically most plausible patron for grand horticultural projects. Babylonian royal inscriptions celebrate his massive construction work, the rebuilding of the great city walls, the Ishtar Gate, and several palaces and temples. Greek authors often ascribe the Hanging Gardens to Nebuchadnezzar, telling a romantic story of their being built for his Median wife Amytis, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Later classical descriptions emphasize a tiered, terraced garden with trees and shrubs seemingly suspended above the ground. Diodorus describes terraces with plane trees, vines, and shrubs. Strabo adds that the terraces were supported by vaults and used cedar beams. Philo explains a device, possibly a chain pump, that raised water to the top. The images created by these sources mix verifiable engineering, the need for a lifting mechanism, with extravagance, very tall terraces, mature shade trees on high platforms, which has pushed scholars to examine whether these accounts were accurate, exaggerated, or even misattributed. No surviving Babylonian inscription. Babylonian kings were proud stonemasons and stone carvers. They left many inscriptions. The absence of a Babylonian inscription or administrative record that explicitly names or details the gardens is puzzling. Possible explanations include the gardens were a private royal pleasure, not deemed necessary to record on public inscriptions. The gardens were located in a part of Babylon whose archaeological layers are now destroyed or inaccessible. Later, Greek writers misattributed gardens located elsewhere to Babylon. See Nineveh hypothesis. The gardens were more modest than later sources suggest, and thus were not specially recorded. Archaeological searches in Babylon, 19th–21st centuries. Excavations at Babylon began earnestly in the 19th century, for example, by Claudius Rich and later by Austin Henry Layard. Robert Koldewey in the early 20th century. Koldewey's excavations, 1899 to 1917, uncovered extensive palaces, vaulted substructures, and evidence for grand habitable platforms and gardens near the palace's finds that some scholars link to the Hanging Gardens. Koldewey reported large vaulted chambers and traces of waterproofing. He also discovered inscriptions and architectural elements belonging to Nebuchadnezzar II. However, later archaeologists have stressed that Koldewey's finds do not provide unequivocal proof that these particular terraces were the legendary Hanging Gardens. Excavations in the 1980s-2000s and surveys by Iraqi archaeologists and international teams have been hampered by modern damage, shifting river channels, and the complexities of successive rebuilding. The Nineveh hypothesis and alternative location theories. A widely debated alternative argues that the famous gardens actually belonged to Nineveh, not Babylon. This theory rests on several points. Sennacherib's inscriptions, Assyrian king, reigned 705 to 681 BCE, describe extensive gardens at Nineveh, including aqueducts and an elaborate water lifting system. Sennacherib boasts of building canals and bringing water to the city by machines, a close match to the engineering Greek authors describe. The timeline is earlier than Nebuchadnezzar and better attested in surviving Assyrian texts and reliefs. The Greek writers may have conflated or mislocated the famous gardens when compiling their lists of wonders. Some scholars, therefore, propose that the Greeks heard of Sennacherib's famous horticultural feats and later attached them to Babylon, the more famous city in their imagination. This explanation helps account for the absence of Babylonian inscriptions, specifically describing hanging gardens, irrigation and water lifting methods. Raising water from the Euphrates to lift it to the highest terrace would have been the central engineering challenge. Proposed methods include chain, pump, Persian wheel, or sakia, a series of buckets on a continuous chain turned by animals or men, lifting water in stages. Archimedean screw, though usually associated with later Hellenistic technology, some suggest similar concepts could have been used. Series of Shadoof-type levers, manual lifting devices operating in sequence. Siphons and canal networks, distributing water horizontally and vertically via sealed terracotta pipes and sluices. Archaeological finds such as ceramic pipes, terracotta conduits, and evidence for watertight terraces support the idea that large-scale irrigation and water transport were technologically feasible in Mesopotamia. Classical sources name plane trees, vines, cedars, and other species that produce shade and fragrance. Mesopotamian horticulture cultivated date palms, pomegranates, figs, vines, willows, poplars, and aromatic herbs. Many of these grow well along canals and in irrigated beds. Some would survive transplanting into elevated terraces so long as adequate soil and moisture were provided. Royal pleasure garden, propaganda, or temple. If the gardens existed, they likely served multiple purposes. Royal leisure and display, a private or semi-public area where the king entertained and demonstrated mastery over nature. Diplomatic symbolism, a gift to a foreign queen, the Amytis story, or a statement of cosmological power. Religious ritual functions. Gardens had sacred associations in Mesopotamia. Temple precincts often contained plantings and waterworks. The Hanging Gardens operate as a cultural symbol across eras, as a romantic image for European travelers and artists, as a symbol of imperial grandeur, and as a cautionary tale about the limits of human power. In the Near East, royal gardens were part of palace culture and connected to royal ideology and provisioning. From Renaissance paintings to 19th century engravings and Hollywood sets, the Hanging Gardens have been reimagined repeatedly.